It hadn't rained in Dry Creek Falls for 73 days. The sky remained a stubborn shade of pale blue, as if clouds themselves had forgotten how to gather over the small Oregon town. Trees drooped, their leaves curled at the edges like burnt paper. The once lively creek, after which the town was named, was now just a dry scar winding through the woods. People still walked past it out of habit, but no one looked at it anymore. It was easier not to. At the edge of town, just off an overgrown gravel road, stood a weathered cabin surrounded by fir trees that had long since stopped growing. That's where 14-year-old Emma Caldwell lived with her grandfather, Thomas, a retired forest ranger known for being both eccentric and fiercely private. The locals called him the Watcher, a nickname earned from decades of roaming the woods with a leather-bound journal and binoculars, scribbling things no one else could see. Emma had lived with him since she was 9, after the car accident that changed everything. Her parents were on their way to a writer's retreat in Washington when their vehicle skidded off a mountain pass. All she remembered was the flashing red of tail lights, a distant scream, and the feeling of falling.
The rest was darkness.
Since then, the cabin had been home, a quiet exile from the world she once knew. Despite the stillness of the place, Emma's curiosity never stayed quiet for long. She had her mother's fire, her father's endless questions. At school, she was the girl who wrote essays that made teachers pause and asked questions that made them uncomfortable. At home, she roamed the dry forests, mapping places no one cared to name anymore, collecting leaves and feathers like clues in a larger mystery. But lately, the mystery had turned inward. Something was wrong with the town. Not just the drought, though that hung over everyone like invisible smoke, but something deeper, stranger. People were acting off. Her teacher, Mr. Reed, once warm and goofy, had started locking his classroom door during lunch. The neighbor's dog, Marley, had vanished without a trace. The mayor had cancelled the annual summer parade with no explanation, and nobody seemed to question it. Worst of all was her grandfather. Thomas, who once rose with the sun and wandered the woods for hours, now stayed indoors most days, staring at the fireplace even though it hadn't been lit in months. He kept muttering things under his breath, words Emma couldn't quite catch, though one kept repeating.
The keeper is walking.
At first, she'd thought it was part of a dream. Then she saw it in his journal, scrawled in red ink across a page filled with map coordinates.
The keeper is walking.
It became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, just after the 4th power outage in a week, Emma decided she'd had enough. If no one else was going to ask questions, she would. She waited until Thomas had dozed off in his chair, then crept into the study. The air was thick with old pine and dust. Shelves lined with books on forest ecosystems, cryptid lore, and ancient folklore stretched from floor to ceiling. She made her way to his desk, carefully sliding open the drawer where she'd seen him hide his journal. It was heavier than she expected. Leather-bound, with a deep scratch across the cover. She opened it to the most recent entry. Something in the earth has shifted. Not just physically.
It's listening.
Dry Creek was never dry by accident. It was held. Guarded. But now the balance is breaking. I've seen signs, animals circling in patterns, the wind changing direction mid-path. The keeper is waking. If it returns, the water may never flow again, not just here but beyond. Emma read it twice, heart pounding louder with each line. What did he mean by held? And who, or what was the keeper? She flipped back a few pages. Coordinates. Symbols.
Descriptions of strange rock formations deep in the forest.
A sketch of what looked like a door embedded in a tree, with a spiraling symbol beneath it. That was when she heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from outside the cabin. Emma froze.
It came again.
Not words exactly, but a breath in the trees. A sound that didn't belong. She moved to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peek through. There was nothing there. She turned back to the journal, and saw that the page had changed. The spiral symbol now glowed faintly, as if someone had etched it with a heatless flame. Beneath it, in the same red ink as before, a new line had appeared. It remembers you.
Emma's breath caught.
The air around her felt thicker, like the moment before a storm breaks. She backed away from the desk, journal still in her hands. That night, sleep didn't come. She lay awake, listening for more whispers, staring at the ceiling and wondering what her grandfather had seen in the forest all those years. Wondering what he had never told her. The next morning, she packed a flashlight, a compass, a canteen, and the journal into her backpack. Thomas was still asleep, or pretending to be. She left a note on the kitchen table. "I'm going to find the door." As she stepped into the woods, the dried leaves crunching beneath her boots, she felt the air shift again, cooler this time, like a memory returning after a long absence. She didn't know it yet, but Dry Creek Falls had been waiting for her. And the keeper had already begun to stir. The forest felt different that morning. Not just because the wind had returned, a gentle breeze whispering through the parched branches, but because something beneath the surface seemed to shift with each step Emma took. It was as if the ground itself was aware of her presence, watching her, remembering her. She followed the coordinates written in her grandfather's journal, using a compass to keep her bearings. The path wasn't marked, but the trees seemed to part subtly in her favor, creating a corridor through the wilderness. Birds, usually quiet during the dry season, fluttered overhead in brief flashes of motion, like guardians escorting her deeper into the unknown. After an hour of hiking, Emma reached the first landmark described in the journal, a stone outcrop shaped like a crescent moon. It jutted out from the hillside, covered in moss despite the drought, as if it alone had been spared the dryness consuming everything else. She paused, running her fingers across the rock. There were markings, barely visible to the eye but etched deep into the surface, like ancient carvings.
Circles vitin circles. Spirals.
The same shape she had seen drawn beneath the door in her grandfather's journal. Emma took a breath, then turned to continue up the trail. The second landmark was supposed to be a tree split down the middle like lightning had struck it. Sure enough, after another 30 minutes of climbing, she found it, an enormous pine, split so perfectly down the trunk that it looked like it had been sculpted. There was no trail beyond that point, only forest. She hesitated, then flipped open the journal again. On the next page was a hand-drawn map, rough but clear. A small clearing, a strange hill, and finally the door. Emma adjusted her backpack and pressed forward, weaving through branches and ducking beneath low-hanging limbs.
Time lost meaning in the thick woods.
The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to hush itself around her.
No birds now.
No wind. Just the rhythmic crunch of her boots on brittle leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. Finally, she reached the clearing. It wasn't large, no more than 20 feet across, but it was unnaturally perfect. Circular, smooth, as if the trees had chosen to grow in a ring, leaving the center untouched. In the middle stood a mound of earth, barely taller than her waist. At first glance, it looked like a natural rise in the terrain. But then she saw it. The outline of a door. It wasn't made of wood or stone. It was the earth itself, packed tightly, shaped with uncanny precision. The spiral symbol was carved into its center, deeper this time, almost pulsing with faint warmth beneath her fingertips when she touched it.
Emma knelt beside the door, heart pounding.
According to her grandfather's notes, this place had been sealed for decades, perhaps centuries. He never said what lay behind it. Only that it was a place of power.
A place of memory.
A place that should remain undisturbed. But something had already begun to stir. The forest had changed. The town was unraveling. And the door, this ancient earthen gate, was responding to her. She ran her fingers along the spiral again, pressing into its center.
Nothing happened.
She tried pushing the door gently.
Still nothing.
Then she remembered one of the last things Thomas had written. When the air stands still and the spiral meets its mirror, the door will know your name. Emma looked around.
No mirrors.
No symbols.
Only trees and silence.
She stood, turning slowly, scanning the perimeter of the clearing. Then she saw it. At the edge of the clearing, half covered by vines, stood a flat stone with a spiral carved into it, identical to the one on the door but reversed. Emma stepped toward it and cleared the vines away. The moment her hand touched the spiral, a gust of wind surged through the clearing. She turned just in time to see the door begin to shift. It didn't swing open or slide. It simply yielded. Like the earth itself had remembered how to breathe and exhaled, revealing a narrow tunnel descending into the ground, lined with old roots and flickering moss that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Emma hesitated. Every instinct told her to turn back. But something else, something older, deeper, urged her forward. She turned on her flashlight, took a final look at the sky above, then stepped into the passage. The temperature dropped instantly. The air smelled like rain, impossible after weeks of drought. The walls were damp, the earth around her humming faintly, like a memory buried too long. The tunnel led her downward in a slow spiral, just wide enough for one person. She walked for what felt like forever, heart thudding, until finally, it opened into a chamber. She stopped in her tracks. The room was vast, far larger than the clearing above should have allowed. The walls were made of stone, smooth and black like obsidian. At the center stood a pedestal, and upon it, a basin filled with water.
Real, clear water.
Emma approached slowly. As she neared, ripples began to form on the surface of the water, though nothing had touched it. Then, images began to appear. A flood swallowing a forest. A group of people in cloaks encircling a tree. Her grandfather younger, standing before the door. And then, herself. But older. Wiser. Eyes filled with sorrow and resolve. Emma stumbled back, breathing hard.
The images vanished. The water settling once more.
The silence returned. Then a voice, deep and ancient, not heard but felt, spoke inside her mind. You have come too soon. But not uncalled. Emma turned wildly, trying to find the source. There was no one. The voice continued. The balance is fractured.
The keeper must return.
But it cannot wake without consequence. She swallowed, voice shaky.
Who are you?
I am what remembers.
Wat quartz. What sleeps beneath the Epsilon Creek and watches the sky. You are the key and the cost.
Before she could ask more, the water in the basin flashed white, and the chamber trembled. Rocks shifted. Dust rained from the ceiling. Emma turned and ran. She barely made it through the tunnel before the ground behind her collapsed.
The door sealed again, the clearing falling silent.
Emma stood breathless, covered in earth and sweat, staring at where the passage had been. She had awakened something. And it was only just beginning. Emma didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her grandfather's cabin, listening to the wind return to Dry Creek in uneasy bursts, like the forest was breathing in gasps. Every so often, she thought she heard something deeper, faint vibrations in the earth, a tremor that didn't reach the surface but made her bones hum. She couldn't stop thinking about the voice.
You are the key and the cost.
What had she awakened? What was the keeper? And why did the chamber show her those visions? By morning, a strange hush had settled over the town, like it was holding its breath. The sky was overcast, unusual for Dry Creek this time of year. Clouds churned with a strange yellow tint, like smoke had tainted their edges. Emma left the cabin and walked to the town square. People were already gathered, murmuring, pointing toward the horizon. Emma followed their gaze and felt her stomach drop. The hills to the north, once dry and cracked, were now coated in mist. Thick, unnatural mist that clung to the ground like a blanket. From within it, the silhouette of trees, some twisted, some unnaturally tall, stood like sentinels. It wasn't there yesterday, said an older woman beside her.
Ivoctose hills every morning.
That place was just dry land. Maybe it's a mirage, someone else said, though their voice lacked conviction. Emma stayed silent.
Checknese trut.
The land had changed because she had entered the chamber. Something ancient had stirred, and Dry Creek was starting to feel its return. She walked to the library, the only place that might hold pieces of the town's buried past. The building was mostly empty, except for Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly librarian who had worked there since Emma was a child. Her white hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she peered over her glasses with a look of faint surprise when Emma entered. Haven't seen you here in a while, she said. Emma hesitated.
I need information.
About the town's early days. Especially anything about rituals.
Legends.
Forests. Mrs. Whitaker raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She led Emma to the back section of the library, a place few people bothered with anymore. Dust lined the shelves. Books with cracked spines and yellowing pages leaned precariously. Emma spent hours digging through old town records, journals, local folklore collections. What she found made her skin crawl. Dry Creek hadn't always been dry. 200 years ago, it was a lush valley, filled with springs and surrounded by dense forests. The town's earliest settlers believed the land was sacred, a place of balance, guarded by a spirit they called the Everwatcher. Stories varied, but most agreed that the Everwatcher lived beneath the earth, in a hidden chamber only accessible by those it deemed worthy. Over time, Settlers stopped honoring the spirit. The land was overused. Rivers were diverted. Forests cut down.
En slowly, the Eva watcha was forgotten.
But not by everyone. In a worn journal from the late 1800s, Emma found an entry written by a man named Elias Moore, one of the last known keepers of the grove.
Wie zilet ze dorte de.
The signs were clear, the land cried, the trees wept sap like blood.
Wie sang the spiral song and presset the earth closet.
It will sleep now. It must. If it wakes before the time is right, the cost will be everything.
The words echoed in Emmas mindestens.
She had opened the door. And the cost, whatever it was, had already begun collecting. That evening, strange things began happening around town. A boy went missing near the southern woods. His parents swore they only turned away for a second. A store owner said his entire stock of water bottles had turned sour, despite being factory sealed. Animals, dogs, cats, even birds, began fleeing toward the hills, disappearing into the mist without hesitation.
And the dreams started.
Emma woke in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, the image of burning trees etched into her vision. In the dream, she stood alone in the clearing, but the sky above was bleeding light. Something massive stirred beneath her feet, rising slowly, and the spiral on the door was glowing so brightly it burned her skin to look at it. The next morning, she found a spiral drawn in ash on her front porch. She wasn't the only one. By noon, half the town had spirals on their doors, windows, or sidewalks. No one admitted to drawing them. No one knew what they meant. But the fear in their eyes said everything. Emma decided to confront the only person left who might know the truth, Father Callahan. He wasn't just the town's pastor. He was also the unofficial keeper of its secrets. Emma remembered how close he had been to her grandfather, how they used to speak in hushed tones at the edge of Sunday services, heads bowed, like confessing ancient sins. She found him at the church, sitting alone in the sanctuary. He looked older than she remembered. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes, when he turned to her, were filled with weary recognition. "You've been to the chamber," he said before she even spoke.
Emma's breath caught.
"You knew about it?" "I warned Thomas," he replied. "Told him not to pass the journal to you. But he believed in second chances. Believed the land might choose differently this time." "It spoke to me," she said. "It showed me things."
Visions.
"And now the town is changing. People are scared." Father Callahan closed his eyes. "The Ever-Watcher is not evil. But it is old. It does not think like we do. It remembers everything, the droughts, the blood spilled, the broken promises." Emma swallowed. "Then what does it want?" He opened his eyes. "Balance."
Always balance.
"It gave us this valley in harmony. We took and forgot. Now it wakes to remind us." The church lights flickered. A low rumble echoed in the distance, like thunder but deeper. Closer.
Emma stood, heart racing.
"Can I stop it?" He looked at her with a mix of sorrow and hope. "I don't know. But you've already been chosen. That means something." Outside, the mist had spread. It wasn't just on the hills anymore. It had reached the edge of town. The mist moved like it was alive. By morning, it had blanketed half of Dry Creek, swallowing buildings, muffling sounds, and turning familiar streets into foreign corridors. People stayed indoors, peeking through drawn curtains. The town, once dusty and sun-bleached, now felt like the inside of a dream, quiet, disoriented, haunted. Emma stood on her porch, spiral still etched in ash beneath her feet. She could hear it now, faint but unmistakable, music.
A melody, simple and strange, homet from some wäre wie Tinsefog.
It didn't come from any radio or speaker. It was in the air itself, vibrating in her chest, as if the land had begun to sing. She walked toward the sound. At first, it was barely audible. But the closer she came to the center of town, the clearer it grew, a repeating sequence of notes, rising and falling, like a lullaby from another age. The melody led her to the fountain in Dry Creek Square, long dried out and cracked. But today, something shimmered at its base. Water. A thin stream trickled up from beneath the stone, dark and thick like oil, but as Emma watched, it began to clear. It shimmered silver, reflecting her face in perfect detail. And within that reflection, her eyes were not her own. They were golden. Ancient. Emma, a voice called from behind. She turned. It was Ben, his face pale, shirt stained with dirt. He looked like he hadn't slept. There's something you need to see, he said. They walked together through the mist, past houses marked with spirals, through streets where silence reigned. Ben said little until they reached the old community center, long abandoned since the new one had been built 10 years ago. Its doors creaked open, and inside people huddled, at least 20 residents of Dry Creek, whispering, clutching old books, candles and drawings. They call themselves the Watchers, Ben said quietly. Your grandfather used to meet with them. I thought it was just folklore stuff. Stories to pass the time. But they knew this would happen.
Emma steppet inside.
The group fell silent. A woman in her 60s stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held the weight of someone who had been waiting a long time. You've seen the chamber, she said. It let you in. Emma nodded. Then the song has begun. What song? Emma asked. The woman gestured to the center of the room. A map of Dry Creek was spread out, hand-drawn and covered in spiral markings. Around it were pages torn from journals, sketches of symbols, and in the middle, an old music sheet, titled Canticle of the Grove. It's not just a song, the woman said. It's a key. A guide. The spiral is more than a symbol, it's a pattern of return. Everything that was broken must be wound again. If the spiral is not completed, the land will reclaim what was taken. Emma stared at the sheet music. The melody matched what she had heard in the fog. But what does it want from me? She asked.
You are the chosen keeper, the woman said.
Every few generations, one is marked. Chosen not just to awaken the grove, but to understand it. To speak its will.
Emma's voice shook.
I don't know how to speak for something I barely understand. You will, the woman replied gently. Because it's already speaking through you. Suddenly, the building trembled.
Allo groen rose from the ground. The candles flickered.
People gasped. From the map on the floor, several marked points began to glow faintly. Ben knelt beside it. What are those places? The woman leaned in. Sites of former balance. There were once 5 sacred groves around this valley.
Only one remains.
Emma stared at the glowing spots. If we restore them. The woman nodded. We might have a chance to stop the unraveling. The group agreed to split up. Emma would go with Ben to the nearest site, what remained of Willow Glen, once a sacred spring, now little more than a dried-up patch behind the power station. They hiked there before nightfall.
The pass was overgrown, the fence broken. Venus twisted around rusted peepers.
But as they stepped into the clearing, Emma felt the same energy she'd felt in the chamber. The air here shimmered, as if reality itself thinned at the edges. What do we do? Ben asked. Emma knelt.
She traced a spiral in the dirt.
Then she began to hum the melody she'd heard from the fog, tentative at first, then stronger. As her voice lifted, the ground beneath them trembled.
The earth split.
A thin jet of water burst upward, scattering dust and light. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The mist around the glen began to pull back.
Ben starred, wide-eyed.
You did that.
Emma shook her head. No.
We did. The land just needed permission to remember. They returned to town to find chaos. More people missing. Phones dead. The sky above Dry Creek now swirled with a ring of clouds, forming a spiral. And at the center, just above the hills, a shape hovered. Towering, indistinct, like a mountain that didn't belong.
A silhouette vetching.
Emma's heart pounded. The Ever-Watcher had risen. That night, as she lay in bed, the spiral on her arm began to glow again. She dreamt of her grandfather standing by the chamber door, whispering the same words again and again. Complete the song.
Restore the 5. Or the spiral ends here.
The next morning, Dry Creek was no longer quiet.
Sirens wailed from the edge of town.
The mist had thinned slightly but not disappeared. A local news crew arrived, drawn by whispers of a strange atmospheric event and mass phone outages. The Watchers urged Emma and Ben to keep the chamber and the song a secret, at least for now. They had no way of knowing who to trust. But trust was already cracking. Outside the community center, 2 townsfolk, Mrs. Dale from the bakery and Kyle from the garage, were arguing. You said it was just an old legend. Mrs. Dale snapped. Now my brother's gone, the water tastes like metal, and there's something glowing in the forest. It's not my fault the stories are real. Kyle shouted back. We were trying to protect people.
Emma Pusshead trug se Smolkraut.
Everyone stop. They turned to her, surprised. She had rarely spoken in front of so many. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. I know you're scared. I am too. But something ancient is waking up under our feet. And I think we have a chance to fix it, if we stay together.
Silence.
Then Mrs. Dale muttered, fix it how? Emma didn't answer. Not yet. She wasn't sure how much truth the town could handle. That evening, she met again with the Watchers. The map now glowed at 4 more points, sites of the lost groves. Only one had been partially restored. Time was running short. We need to locate the others, Ben said.
Fast. An old man with trembling hands stepped forward.
His name was Eli, and he'd once been her grandfather's closest friend. Your grandfather left behind journals, Eli said. He never shared them with the council. Said they were only for the keeper. Emma followed him to the attic of his home. Dust blanketed everything, and the air smelled of cedar and mothballs. He opened an old wooden chest and pulled out a bundle of leather-bound books, worn and frayed at the edges. The journals were filled with sketches, spirals, trees, symbols, and long entries written in a looping script. As Emma turned the pages, she began to see the pieces fit together. Her grandfather had been preparing her. He had mapped out all 5 sites. He had translated parts of the spiral song into multiple variations, melodies that corresponded to different locations. He had warned of the Ever-Watcher's return. But there was something else. A prophecy. When the spiral breaks and the song fades, it read, the Ever-Watcher will walk among us again, not in shadow but in form. It will choose a host. If that host becomes corrupted, the spiral will collapse. Not just here. Everywhere. Emma's blood chilled. A host.
Ellie nodded grimly.
A vessel. A mind strong enough to channel its will. In the past, the keepers were protected. But if one is twisted, if they refuse the spiral, then the Watcher consumes instead of guides. Emma closed the book.
She understood now.
It wasn't just about restoring balance. It was about protecting her own soul. That night, the dreams returned. She was in the chamber again, but this time it was submerged, filled with silver water. A figure stood at the far end. Tall, robed, faceless. It raised one hand, and the water rippled with sound, musical notes etched into the air. A question hung between them, silent but clear. Will you finish what your bloodline began?
Emma woke up gasping.
Her arm burned. The spiral on her skin was no longer static, it pulsed, like a second heartbeat. She dressed quickly and met Ben at the outskirts of town. They were headed to the second site, Hollow Pines. According to her grandfather's map, it was located within a forested ridge just past the old sawmill. The trail was overgrown and choked with moss, but the further they walked, the more the silence pressed in. No birds. No wind. Just the rhythm of their footsteps and the faint, ever-present hum of the spiral song. At the heart of Hollow Pines stood a massive hollowed-out tree, wide enough for 3 people to stand inside. Emma stepped in alone. She placed her palm against the inner bark. It felt warm. She began to sing. This time, she didn't mimic the melody. She improvised, pulling from memory, intuition, and a strange inner voice that had been growing louder since the chamber. Her voice echoed through the hollow trunk, and the ground shook.
Roots uncurled from beneath the earth. A shimmer spread across the grove like day in moonlight.
And then,
a scream. Ben. Emma ran outside.
He was on the ground, clutching his head. Standing over him was a woman she didn't recognize, tall with wild, dark hair and eyes that shimmered gold. She wore a cloak woven from shadows, her presence bending the air around her. You're too late, the woman said.
The spiral belongs to me now.
Emma stood her ground.
Who are you? I am the memory of the first broken keeper, the woman said.
I was the one who turned away.
I let the Watcher in.
Ben groaned.
Emma stepped between them. You don't have to control this anymore, Emma said. We're healing the groves. We can finish the song. The woman laughed, a sound that echoed unnaturally through the trees. You think the spiral is healing, she sneered. It is tightening, twisting inward. You are singing it shut. And then she was gone, dissolved into mist. Ben coughed, trying to sit up.
Shetuchet me.
I felt something, like she was inside my head. Emma helped him up, her voice trembling. We need to hurry.
Back in the Y-Krieg. The sky had darkened again. The spiral in the clouds spun faster. Power flickered.
Phones remained dead.
The watchers scattered once more.
We're not just racing against time, Emma told them. Something else is trying to complete the spiral. But in reverse. Not to restore, but to unravel. They all turned to the map. 3 sites remained. And the Ever-Watcher was watching. Dry Creek was no longer united. Whispers had turned into arguments, and arguments into open division. Some townspeople blamed the Watchers, accusing them of awakening whatever force now loomed over the town. Others called Emma a fraud, or worse, a puppet of the very darkness she claimed to fight. Emma felt the weight of every gaze as she walked down Main Street. She kept her hood up, the spiral on her arm now fully visible, pulsing with a light no cloth could hide. Ben walked beside her, still pale and distant from his encounter with the shadowed woman in Hollow Pines. Since then he'd been quieter, his thoughts tangled in memories that weren't always his own. At the edge of town, a group had formed, self-proclaimed guardians, dressed in homemade armor, armed with tools and hunting rifles. They called themselves the Line. Their leader, a former police officer named Grant Mathers, had once worked with Emma's father. Now, he stood in her path with cold eyes and clenched fists. This ends now, he said. You and your Watchers brought this here. Whatever you're digging up, it's poisoning us. Emma didn't back down. It was already here, buried under silence. We're trying to fix what's broken. No, Grant replied.
You're remarking it was.
People are disappearing. The animals are acting like they've gone mad.
Last night, 3 kids saw a figure walking up over the river. Glowing eyes, no face. Ben stepped forward.
We saw it too.
She's not Emma. She's so meeting older.
A warning. Grant's jaw tightened. Then maybe it's time we stop listening to fairy tales and take back our town. Emma held his gaze. That won't save you. But she knew they wouldn't listen. Not yet. Back at the Watchers' sanctuary, the atmosphere was tense. Arguments flared. Some believed they should go public, warn the entire county, maybe even call in the government. Others feared that would only draw more eyes, more chaos. Emma paced the floor, her grandfather's journal open on the table. There's something he mentioned, she said aloud, flipping pages.
A key hidden beneath the Tierzeit.
He called it the spine root, a living conduit between all groves. If we can awaken it, maybe we can slow the spiral's collapse. Where is it? Asked Eli. She pointed to the map. Here. The Salt Flats. A murmur passed through the room. That area had long been abandoned, marred by industrial runoff and believed to be lifeless. But according to the journal, it was once the most vibrant of the 5 groves. A sacred intersection where earth, water, and sound converged. They left at dawn. The journey to the Salt Flats took hours by foot, through terrain that twisted unnaturally, trees bent toward unseen pressure, and birds flew in strange silent patterns above them. When they reached the outer rim, the ground cracked beneath their boots. The air shimmered with a strange distortion, like heat rising from asphalt even though the temperature had dropped. In the center of the basin stood a ring of petrified trees, their bark gleaming with mineral veins. At the heart of the circle was a sinkhole.
Emma stepped forward.
The song has to be different here, she murmured. It's not about restoring. It's about remembering. She began to hum, a low resonant tone that mimicked the rhythm of dripping water on hollow stone. Slowly, she added notes, layering echoes into the air. The others joined her, each voice finding a harmony that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The spiral on her arm flared with heat. The sinkhole pulsed, then cracked open. A rush of wind roared upward as light spilled from the earth, not golden, like before, but deep blue and violet. Beneath the surface, they saw it, the spine root. It looked like a massive tree inverted underground, its roots hanging like a cathedral of veins. And within it, eyes. Dozens. Watching. Blinking.
Ben steppet back. It's alive.
Emma swallowed hard. It's been dreaming. Then, the wind stopped. The spiral dimmed.
And so meeting Rose from the edge of the basin. The woman again.
Her cloak was darker now, shifting like ink in water. But her face had changed. Half of it was Ben's. His eyes, his jawline. Twisted and mirrored. She spoke in a voice that echoed twofold.
We are one now.
Ben froze, his face pale. What does she mean? Emma reached for him, but he stepped away. I've been hearing things, he said slowly. Since Hollow Pines. Thoughts that aren't mine. Dreams that feel older than me. I thought I could shut them out, but... The woman raised her hand.
Soon, you will remember everything, she whispered.
And then, the spiral will open to its true purpose. The watchers readied themselves, but Emma held them back. She doesn't want to fight. Not yet.
She wants to divide us.
Eli nodded. The more fear she sows, the weaker the spiral becomes. The woman faded once more, her last words hanging in the air like fog.
3 down. 2 to fall.
And 1 to carry me home. Back in Dry Creek, things had worsened. The line had barricaded the northern road, cutting off one of the sites. Rumors spread of people forming cult-like groups, interpreting the spiral as a sign of salvation or doom. One group claimed to have received visions telling them to stop Emma at all costs. And in the shadows, the Ever-Watcher waited. Emma knew they had little time. They would have to go underground, through the old mining tunnels beneath the hills, to reach the next site. But worse, she had begun to sense a change in Ben. His silence. The way he stared into the fire at night, humming fragments of the Watcher's lullaby without knowing it. She couldn't lose him. Not now. She touched the spiral on her arm. It was no longer a gift. It was a doorway. And every time she sang, she heard something sing back. The entrance to the mines lay hidden beneath the collapsed chapel at the edge of Dry Creek. A relic from another time, the building had long since been abandoned, its wood warped and bones of glass windows buried under ivy and dust. Emma stood at the threshold, her boots crunching on scattered rubble, staring into the yawning darkness below. Behind her, the watchers readied their gear, headlamps, ropes, maps of old tunnels drawn from her grandfather's journals. Ben stood quietly, his face unreadable, his spiral now faintly visible even in the dark. Emma could feel something shifting in him, like pressure behind glass. He hadn't spoken much since the vision at the salt flats, and his silence pressed against her more than words ever could. They descended in single file, the air turning cold and metallic as stone swallowed them whole. The tunnels stretched for miles, many unmapped and unstable. Water dripped from above, echoing through the darkness like a clock ticking down. Emma led the way, the light from her lantern casting strange shadows that seemed to stretch and reach for her as she passed. At the first chamber, they found carvings, spirals etched into the rock, not with tools, but by hand. Emma touched one. The stone was smooth, unnaturally so, like something had burned the shape into its surface without heat. Eli ran his fingers along the wall. These weren't made by miners, he whispered. This is older. Deeper still, they entered what her grandfather called the echo spine, a cavern where sound never fully died. Even whispers bounced and returned, warped and elongated, like the earth itself was listening. Emma stepped into the center and hummed a single note. The spiral on her arm pulsed. And then a voice, not hers, answered. Emma. She froze. Did anyone else hear that? She asked. Ben nodded. It said your name. It happened again. A low murmur, shaped like a voice but layered with tones too deep for human lungs. The walls trembled, and a gust of wind swept through the cavern, even though there were no openings above or below. Suddenly, the rock before them shifted, folding open like a great stone iris. Behind it lay a chamber unlike anything they'd seen, a cathedral carved into the earth itself. Massive spirals spiraled upward in columns, glowing faintly blue, and in the center, a pool of still silver water. Emma stepped forward. The moment her foot touched the edge, the pool rippled and showed her a vision, not just of the past, but of her origins. She saw her mother, pregnant, walking through the groves with her grandfather. She saw him carving a mark into the base of a tree, sealing something beneath it. Then, her mother placing a baby on a stone altar in the woods, as light filtered through the trees. Around them, watchers chanted softly, tears in their eyes. "You were bound to the spiral before you took your first breath," said a voice behind her. She turned.
Ben.
But it wasn't Ben. His eyes were wrong, dilated and glowing faintly, like the pool. "You feel it now, don't you?" he asked. "The thinning of the veil. Every step you take pulls you closer to what you truly are." Emma's chest tightened. "You're not him." "I am and I'm not," he replied. "He let me in when the shadow found him. When he looked too long into the mirror. When he touched the salt root. He opened the door." She raised her lantern. "Give him back." The figure smiled with Ben's mouth. "He's not gone. He's watching. Just like I do. Just like the Everwatcher always has." With a sudden cry, Eli lunged from the shadows, striking the figure with a piece of iron ore. It staggered back, howling as smoke rose from its skin. Emma grabbed Ben, as he fell to the ground, unconscious. The spiral on his arm flickered and dimmed. They had only moments. Eli pulled Emma back. "We can't stay. This place, it's feeding it." Together, they carried Ben through the tunnel, the shadows behind them now pulsing with a life of their own. The cathedral closed, the spiral doors sealing shut with a groan of ancient stone. They ran until the air grew warmer, until light filtered through cracks above. They emerged near the old ranger's cabin, just outside the northern woods. Ben awoke by the fire that night, pale and shaking. Emma sat beside him, holding his hand. "I saw her," he whispered.
Not the woman, the real one.
"The Everwatcher. She has no face. Just a spiral that goes deeper than anything. She said I'm her echo." Emma's voice trembled. "You're more than that."
You re still you.
Ben turned his head.
You don't understand.
"She doesn't just want to return. She wants to rewrite." Emma's breath caught. "Rewrite what?"
Us.
Everything. The groves weren't meant to protect this world. They were meant to cage hers. And we're breaking the locks, one by one. The next morning, they gathered the watchers. Emma stood before them, stronger now despite the fear in her chest. "We've made a mistake," she said. "We thought we were restoring balance. But the spiral is more than a pattern. It's a door. And someone is trying to open it from the other side."
Eli steppet forward.
"Then we stop them." Emma looked at Ben, then back at the others.
No.
"We seal it. We find the last grove. And we do what my grandfather couldn't. We finish it." They traveled north, where the air was sharp with the scent of pine and the wind sang through dead branches like a warning. The last grove, according to Emma's grandfather's map, lay beyond Ridgewater, a forgotten logging town swallowed by trees and time. No roads led there anymore, only game trails and whispers. Ben had changed since the hollow earth. Though his eyes were his own again, something in him remained stretched too thin, like his soul had been pressed through a sieve. He often stared into the forest for too long, as if listening for something no one else could hear. Still, he stayed by Emma's side, his hand always close to hers. The watchers moved with purpose now. Gone were their quiet rituals and careful speculation, what remained was action. Preparation. They carried the last iron root, gleaming black and heavy with weight that wasn't physical. Only 3 groves remained sealed. 2 had already unraveled, leaving only Ridgewater between them and the breach. The forest changed as they neared it. Trees twisted in unnatural spirals, bark pulsing with veins of silver sap. Time bent there, watches ticked backward, conversations echoed before they were spoken, and shadows grew where no light had been. Eli stopped mid-stride and turned to Emma. "I've been here before," he said, voice unsteady.
Veni was a boy.
"My father took me hunting. I thought I imagined it, the trees whispering."
Te don't whisper, Ben murmuret.
They remember. At the edge of the grove, they found the remains of Ridgewater. Rotten cabins, half swallowed by moss. A rusted swing moved slowly in the breeze, though no wind stirred.
In the center stood a der tree taller tanserest, bark blackened and limbs curled like fingers in pine.
It was the fractured grove. Emma stepped forward and felt it immediately. The spiral on her arm burned hot, but it wasn't pain. It was resonance. A hum that matched her heartbeat, calling something buried deep inside her. They made camp at the edge of town, unable to get closer. The grove resisted, pushing back with nausea, hallucinations, and memory fractures. Ben collapsed when he crossed its border, screaming names no one recognized. That night, the watchers gathered, firelight flickering against anxious faces. "We can't delay," Emma said.
Ever hour wie weit, ze wil tins.
"You've seen it, the forest is changing."
Reality's breaking down.
Eli nodded. "But how do we plant the root? It won't let us near." "We don't go around it," she replied.
Wie go trug.
She took out her grandfather's journal, flipping to a page marked only with a single phrase: "The wound must be remembered to be healed." "What if the grove doesn't resist us?" she continued.
What if it's calling us to remember?
Ben looked up.
It's a memory, not a place.
The last fracture isn't physical. It's emotional. The watchers fell silent.
That night, Emma walked alone into the grove. The moment she crossed the threshold, time unraveled.
She was 10 years old again, watching her mother disappear into the woods with a stranger, her grandfather. She called after them, but no sound came. Then the scene shifted. She was 16, standing over a grave, her mother's spiral-marked hand still warm in hers. Then again, she was older, crying in the chapel ruins, clutching the journal she swore she'd never open. And then the core memory. She was a baby, held in her mother's arms in the original grove. Chanting surrounded them.
The air shimmered. A woman with no face. Just the infinite spiral. Stood on the other side of the veil.
Her mother was weeping. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "But she must be tied. She must never forget who she is." The woman reached forward, and light poured into Emma's infant form. Back in the present, Emma fell to her knees, sobbing. The grove pulsed with her grief. "I remember," she said aloud.
The dead tree cracked open.
Ben ran to her, followed by the watchers. The grove no longer resisted. Instead, it welcomed them in, like a wound longing for healing touch. At the heart of the broken roots, a cavity waited, still glowing with residual light. Emma approached it, pulling the iron root from its case. "This is the last," she whispered.
Let it hold.
She placed the root into the earth. The spiral on her arm blazed, the heat of 1,000 suns coursing through her. The grove groaned, wood snapping, earth trembling. The tree rose, its black bark splitting, revealing fresh green beneath.
En 10, silence. Not adet silence.
A full one. Like a breath finally exhaled. Ben dropped to the ground beside her, pale and shaking. "It's not over," he whispered. "I felt her."
The Eva Watcher.
"She's not bound by roots." Emma looked at him, eyes wide. "She's bound by us," he finished. "By memory. By sacrifice."
Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them.
From the east, a wave of darkness rolled across the horizon, like fog, but alive, hungry. "She knows we're trying to seal her out," Eli said.
And now she's coming.
Emma stood, spine straight despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Then we make our stand." They turned back toward the forest, toward Dry Creek, where the first spiral had been drawn. They didn't rest. From Ridgewater, they moved swiftly through the broken woods, tracing the old ley lines back toward Dry Creek. The forest around them had transformed, no longer merely a setting, but a sentient presence. Trees twisted in their wake, the air thick with whispers and the taste of metal. The veil had thinned almost entirely now, the world of the Everwatcher bled through the cracks. In the distance, Emma could see the skies bending, as if the stars themselves were leaning closer, drawn by the pull of the spiral. The Watchers marched in silence, weapons and relics strapped tightly, but they all knew, this final stand wouldn't be fought with blades alone. Ben walked beside Emma, one hand gripping the journal that had guided them from the start. Since Ridgewater, he had changed again, no longer fractured, but awakened. Something ancient pulsed behind his eyes, not malevolent, but vast. He was remembering too. Dry Creek came into view at dawn, bathed in the pale blue of an early morning that felt like the last. The town had emptied. Those who hadn't already fled were now gone, whether by choice or by force, no one could say. The church stood skeletal, its roof long since collapsed. The spiral altar Emma had first stumbled upon now glowed with quiet power, the markings pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. They circled the town square, the same way her grandfather once had. The watchers placed their relics, the last of the spiral-sealed talismans, in each of the cardinal directions. When all were in place, Emma stepped into the center. "This is where it began," she said. "And this is where it ends."
The earth ground beneath them, a deep, low sound like a giant exhaling. The sky fractured.
Clouds split down the middle as a shape began to descend, a figure made of light and shadow, larger than a mountain, her face an endless spiral that turned inward and outward at once. The Ever-Watcher had come. For a moment, no one moved. The force of her presence pinned them in place, not with gravity but with memory. Each watcher was cast into visions of their worst regrets, the truths they had buried, the people they had failed. Emma stood firm. "Enough," she said, voice steady. The spiral on her arm flared gold. A beam of light shot upward from the altar, striking the Ever-Watcher's form. She recoiled, not in pain, but recognition. "You are not the first to wear the mark," the voice boomed, not spoken but felt, pressed into their minds. "You are not the first to forget." "I am not here to forget," Emma replied.
"I am here to remember."
And with that, she took Ben's hand. Together, they stepped forward. Their combined memories, his pain, her strength, their shared loss, radiated from them like wildfire. The spiral beneath their feet widened, becoming a well of glowing threads that tethered them to every moment, every sacrifice. The Ever-Watcher screamed, not in rage, but in grief. "Why do you fear me?" she asked, her form flickering.
"I am memory."
"I am truth. I am the wound you refuse to see." Emma closed her eyes.
"No.
You are the wound that never healed. And now we choose to heal." The relics around the town burst into flame, not destructive but cleansing. A storm of light and sound swirled upward, drawn into the Ever-Watcher's core. She struggled, pulled between dimensions, her form beginning to unravel. Ben stepped forward, reaching into his coat. He pulled free the final page of the journal, a page no one had noticed before. On it was a spiral, inked in blood. "The last tether," he said. "It's not a weapon. It's an offering." Emma took it, her hands trembling. She stepped into the center of the altar. Around her, the world shook. Buildings crumbled, trees twisted into symbols, the very fabric of the veil strained like thin cloth. She held the page high. "I see you," she said to the Ever-Watcher.
"And I forgive you."
Light exploded outward.
Notdestruktion.
Integration. The Ever-Watcher's form dissolved into a million threads, each one drifting down like ash and light. Where they touched the earth, flowers bloomed, the sky mended, and silence fell, not of emptiness but of completion. Emma fell to her knees, exhausted. The spiral on her arm had vanished, leaving only a faint scar. Ben rushed to her side, his eyes wide with wonder. "She's gone," he said. "No," Emma corrected gently. "She's part of us now. She always was." The Watchers emerged from the ruins, changed. The memory visions had passed, and with them came peace. Not absence of pain, but understanding of it. Eli approached, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "What now?" he asked. Emma looked up at the rising sun. For the first time in weeks, it felt warm.
"Now we teach the world to remember."
And to heal. The days that followed were unlike any Emma had ever known. The air in Dry Creek felt lighter, as if centuries of pressure had lifted with the Ever-Watcher's departure. The sky stretched wider, clearer, and even the birds seemed to sing a different song. Yet beneath the beauty, a strange silence lingered, the kind that settles after something too big to explain. The Watchers didn't scatter. Not right away. They stayed in Dry Creek, helping rebuild what little had been damaged, and more importantly, anchoring what had been restored within the people. The spiral may have receded from view, but its imprint remained, within the soil, the stone, and their very memories. Emma often wandered alone now, notebook in hand, stopping to sketch the places that had once terrified her. The altar in the town square was gone. In its place stood a ring of stones, hand-placed by the Watchers, each engraved with one word, remember. It became a quiet place of gathering. Not worship, not fear, just presence. Ben had taken to repairing the old schoolhouse, converting it into something new, a center for stories, teachings, and artifacts. A place where memory would no longer be hidden away in basements or burned from journals. Children came, first from nearby towns, then from further out, curious about the whispers of Dry Creek. They didn't come looking for ghosts. They came searching for truth. Emma taught them. She spoke not of monsters but of forgetting, and how remembering, though painful, could also be healing. She taught them that memory was not the enemy, nor was the past something to run from. It was to be faced, held, and eventually transformed. It wasn't always easy. Some nights, the dreams returned. She would wake with her heart racing, convinced the spiral still turned beneath her skin. But then she would step outside, breathe in the mountain air, and find Ben waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of tea and that same quiet knowing in his eyes. "You still feel her, don't you?" he asked one night, under a sky glittering with stars. Emma nodded. Not in a threatening way.
Just, a presence.
Like a memory I didn't live, but still understand. "She was never meant to be our enemy," Ben said. "Just the part of us we couldn't accept." "And now?" she asked. He looked up at the stars. "Now we've made space for her."
For ourselves.
Their relationship had deepened, not with declarations, but with silence, with shared space. 2 souls that had been fractured by time, grief, and truth, now held together by what they had faced. Across the country, whispers of Dry Creek began to surface. Some called it a myth, others a miracle. But those who had been changed carried the spiral in small ways, a tattoo on the wrist, a symbol on a front door, or simply a new way of living. Communities formed, tiny watcher circles in towns and cities. Not to fight monsters, but to tell stories. To gather. To remember. Eli returned to the East Coast, carrying relics and journals with him, becoming an archivist of sorts. Sam took a different path, walking into the deep wilds of the Pacific Northwest, saying only that she had more to remember. As for Father Grayson, he remained in Dry Creek, quietly restoring the chapel, not for faith in gods, but in memory. Months passed.
Emma stood one morning at the edge of the forest, watching the fog roll over the mountains.
A young girl, no older than 10, stood beside her, clutching a notebook. "Is it true?" the girl asked, eyes wide. "That you spoke to something ancient?" Emma smiled. "Yes."
Weren't you scared?
"I was. Very." "What did she look like?" Emma thought for a long moment. "She looked like everything I didn't want to face. But also, like every answer I'd ever needed." The girl nodded, solemn, and scribbled in her notebook.
"I want to remember, too."
"You will," Emma said. "But remember gently. The past isn't a weapon. It's a mirror." That night, as lanterns glowed across the town and laughter rose from the gathering at the square, Emma stood on the hill above, looking down at the people who had stayed. Survivors, yes, but also seekers, healers, builders of something new. Ben joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "This is how it should have been," he whispered. Emma leaned against him. "Maybe this is how it always was meant to be."
We just forgot the beginning.
From her pocket, she drew out the final piece of her grandfather's letter, one she had found weeks after the battle, hidden in the seams of his old coat. It was short, handwritten in faded ink.
To remember is to laugh again. Don't fear the spiral. Wog it also wehtrug.
She read it aloud to Ben, then folded it gently and tucked it into the roots of the old pine where she used to sit as a girl. The wind picked up.
Liebes Dankset.
In the distance, a new group of travelers approached Dry Creek, drawn by stories they didn't yet understand. Emma smiled. The spiral had not ended. It had simply opened.